The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There's this sort of conventional wisdom or common sense, or actually both of those terms often don't make sense, but there is this sort of conventional wisdom that Trump voters made the choice to vote for Donald Trump because of so-called economic anxiety, right? And that in particular, Trump was sort of speaking to the economic anxieties of middle class and often rural white voters to a better degree, to a greater degree than Hillary Clinton did. And so voila, they voted for Donald Trump instead of Hillary Clinton. And the New York Times has a really good report out on a new study by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that points in a very, very different direction, and one that I actually think makes more sense when you really examine it critically, to explain why many Trumpists ended up voting for Donald Trump. And so it is true that according to this study, the white male voting contingent, particularly the white Christian male voting contingent, was moved to vote for Trump, but not by economic anxiety, but instead by fear of losing their status. And the study found that mostly people voted along party lines, as is typically the case in presidential elections. Republicans mostly voted for Donald Trump, Democrats mostly voted for Hillary Clinton, but among independents and among people who cross-voted, meaning Democrats voting for Trump or Republicans voting for Hillary Clinton, those who ended up voting for Donald Trump were disproportionately likely to see their status in society as threatened in some way, more likely to see whites and or Christians and or men as facing new discrimination. And this is not just like a cherry-picked data point, while every other study says no, economic anxiety was the reason. There's another study. The Public Religion Research Institute did a similar survey, and it also found that this contingent of white Christian men were moved to vote for Trump disproportionately because of their fear of being displaced in the culture, which is a very similar result. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Did voters really care about bad trade deals per se? They told themselves that they did, even though many of them didn't actually have the economic understanding to really get what it meant. But it's that they saw in Trump the guy that would prevent people in Asia or Hispanics from Latin America from taking their jobs away and thus questioning or putting in peril their status. Asians in factories weren't going to be as likely to take jobs if Donald Trump was the president. Is it because of a nuanced understanding of how Trump would do trade? No, but it's the idea that it would protect their status in society. And when you look at the results and you pair them up with Trump policy ideas, I guess we'd call them very generally policy ideas, although they don't all actually translate to real policy, it makes a lot of sense. There's this sort of psychology of superiority of privilege that exists. And if you see Hispanics or immigrants or minorities, non-Christians, women, if you see them as achieving not superior but equal status in society, comparatively you're losing status, right? And that will influence you to vote for the candidate who you at least perceive might help you maintain that status. This relates to minimum wage phenomenon. One of the income groups, when you do surveys of who supports an increase to the minimum wage and who is against an increase to the minimum wage, it's not the upper middle class that overwhelmingly opposes minimum wage increases. It's not the rich or the ultra rich, although some do oppose it. It's not even often the middle class. The people making just more than minimum wage are one of the groups that most commonly opposes increases to the minimum wage, because what separates them from the minimum wage workers? Not that much in their mind. And it is the exact same psychological phenomenon that we see here among a lot of Trump voters. And by the way, when you look at history and you look at when politics has been done to avoid losing some kind of privileged status, be it a real privileged status or a perceived privileged status, things often don't go well at all. So I think that in addition to the sort of coalescing and catalyzing of a lot of these extremist groups that we've seen under Donald Trump, the idea of people voting to prevent a loss of what they see as a privileged status is also a really concerning thing.
I also wonder how this will influence the Bernie would have won crowd.
Oh,
because
sure.
the idea behind that theory was that Bernie was an economic populist, so he wouldn't have lost those Rust Belt states. Like, he wouldn't have lost Pennsylvania and Michigan because he talked about trade and he talked about NAFTA. But Bernie didn't do that race-baiting stuff. He didn't do that right-wing identity politics. So maybe there's a case to be made that Trump could have beat Bernie too. I don't know.
These numbers certainly go more towards that story than the one that we have heard, which is Bernie definitely would have won. I actually don't know the answer to that because the entire general election campaign would have been very different if Trump was running against Bernie Sanders. So I don't know how useful it is to really speculate about Bernie would have won or Bernie would not have won. I know that I would have voted for Bernie in the general the same way I voted for him in the primary had he been the candidate. I'm going to be very interested to see data from the upcoming midterms outlining what factors motivate voting one way or the other, because you'll have this potential, you've got the economic anxiety narrative, you've got the fear of losing privileged status narrative, and then you also have now the sort of counter-Trump move or influence momentum, which has led to a lot of Democratic wins in special elections over the last year. So certainly midterm 2018 data will be very interesting to look at. Let's talk about a visit to the United States by French President Emmanuel Macron, who went to Washington, D.C. yesterday. First state dinner took place last night. The entire thing was a gong show from the get-go, and I'm going to get to Donald Trump's statement about his 2+ hour meeting with Macron momentarily. But just to give you first a little bit of the flavor for the endless string of bizarre faux pas, each outdoing the previous in terms of Trump's meeting with world leaders, during a photo op in the White House, Donald Trump at one point claimed to be wiping dandruff off of the shoulder of the French president. And the funniest thing, if you're watching, you'll be able to hear what Trump says, whether you're listening or watching. If you're watching, you'll also be able to observe the look on Emmanuel Macron's face when Donald Trump is doing this. And it's an amazing reaction by virtue of non-reaction. Macron sort of stone-faced with a smile, right? Like an immovable smile on his face, as Donald Trump claims to be wiping dandruff off of the French president's suit. Take a look at this. Take a listen to this.
Mr. President, they're all saying what a great relationship we have, and they're actually correct. It's not fake news. Finally, it's not fake news. So it's a great honor that you're here. But we do have a very special relationship. In fact, I'll get that little piece of dandruff off. That little piece. We have to make him perfect. He is perfect. So it is really great to be with you, and you are a special friend. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Yeah, interestingly, that was the least cringeworthy moment of the entire visit. So it only got worse from there. And they did a sort of statement after their meeting. They were sitting across from each other at a table. Mike Pence was next to Trump, and Jim Mattis and John Bolton was on Trump's side of the table, and everything about it was just transmitting a very, very strange atmosphere. Let's go through a few clips from the meeting.
We were going to have a short little meeting, and it turned out to be a long meeting, and it could have gone on for another 2 hours. We discussed a lot of things, a lot of problems in the world, a lot of problems that we think can be solved. We've come a long way, just the two of us, I think, as understanding. We talked about Iran, we talked about Syria, we talked about a lot of subjects that really are big, hard situations, and we think we have solutions to a number of them. So we're going to continue that now, and then Emmanuel and myself will meet again, I think, after this meeting.
Right. Aside from Trump referring to them going over a number of big, hard situations, that actually, again, that's not the weirdest part of this. What's weird, I think, is sort of a couple things. Number one, there's this attitude from Trump generally that, like, he's better than Macron, right? On some level, he's a better man, he's a better person, he's more important than Macron. But also, there's this feeling like it's all sort of a bother to him. Like he he's sort of, yeah, I'm doing this, and we had a meeting, we could have met longer, we talked about trade, I set the agenda, but it's all kind of like from a point of condescension, isn't it?
He's just going through the motions. He's talking
Yeah.
a lot without saying anything. And I kind of wish I could do that too. You're just like filling the air.
Well, and what he ended up doing is just going very quickly into bragging about random things, right? So there's no real indication that he actually saw the content of the meeting with the French president as that important, because he immediately jumped into bragging about unemployment rates in different states. Take a look.
Very good numbers are coming out on our businesses. You're seeing the numbers that are getting released on our companies and our businesses. They're very strong. The economy is been really incredible. Unemployment now is at the lowest point ever in history in many states. The states were enumerated last night, late last night. The numbers came out, and we've hit the lowest unemployment numbers in many decades in some cases, and in some cases the lowest numbers, period. It was just reiterated that unemployment for African American families, it's been the best in history. For Hispanic families, the best in history. For women, the best in 18 years, and that's very close to going much higher than that. So it's really something very special, so we're very happy about that.
It's like, what is he talking about? If you're Emmanuel Macron and you're sitting there across from him, what do you make of the fact that Trump is just making absolutely no sense? And a lot of the stuff he said wasn't even true. He said we've gotten the numbers from our companies and everything's great. The Dow crashed 500 points yesterday on anticipated bad earnings numbers. Like, where is Trump getting this stuff? And it just went on like this for a while. I don't know what is going through the French president's head as this is going on. And then Trump talks about his conversation with Macron again, this time saying they talked about trade, which I'm sure they did, but it's made abundantly clear that Trump doesn't know anything about trade. Look at this.
The president and I working on trade. The trade with France is complicated because we have the European Union. I would rather deal just with France. The Union is very tough for us. They have trade barriers that are unacceptable. Our farmers can't send their product into the European Union easily as they should, and we accept their product, so we have to make a change. And they understand that, and we're negotiating, Wilbur and Steve and everybody, we're negotiating with the European Union.
Yeah, everybody's doing a great job, and then trade apparently got Trump into talking about China, where it really got strange. Take a look at this last clip.
We have no choice but to be very serious. You know, we've put on very substantial tariffs, and that will continue unless we make a trade deal. I think we've got a very good chance of making a deal. As you know, they've just stated President Xi, a terrific guy and a friend of mine, but he's representing China and I'm representing the United States. President Xi made a speech 4 days ago where he said that China is going to be opened up. Well, because it's not opened up right now. They trade with us, we can't trade with them. They did $504 billion last year, and we did $120 billion. That's a tremendous imbalance, and we can't have that.
Yeah. The key moment there was when Trump clarified that he represents the United States in trade deals. It's actually good to clarify that. Often I don't know whose side Trump is on from what he says. So it's good that he said, by the way, I do represent the United States here. Sort of a verbal Rorschach test of sorts, right? He later talked about North Korea. I won't subject you to that stuff. And then finally, Emmanuel Macron gets a chance to speak. And I realized in his non-native English, Macron is more articulate and better able to communicate in a sort of reasonable human way than Donald Trump is.
And with that, thank you all very much. Mr. President, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Mr. President, for this word. We will have this large meeting. We will spend a while together again before the press conference, just to say that we had a very good discussion on Syria, on Iran, the overall region, and some other very important topics regarding our security. And I think we have to work together because we've always worked together on these issues, and it's very important to preserve the stability of this region. And I think what we want to do in the interest of our people is precisely to preserve stability, sovereign states without any hegemony.
There it is. So Emmanuel Macron putting a final point on that, and I decided to wade into online comments about this entire thing. And the Trumpists are just loving it, right? Despite the fact that Trump looks like he just woke up at that table and all of a sudden said, wow, there's cameras here and I should say something. oh, Trump must be playing 4D chess. It's just unbelievable. Every move he makes is so carefully crafted and just brilliant in every way. So we're not probably going to agree with those folks.
They also liked it when Trump was being adversarial with Macron, so I guess they can have it either way.
Sure.
I mean, before there was like the handshake games.
Yep.
Now there's the kissing,
the
grooming. I like it all, really.
They were kissing and grooming each other a lot and holding hands and stuff. It was just every detail down to the smallest minutia. Bizarre and unexplainable in so many ways, and we'll see what the eventual diplomatic repercussions are of this very strange and bizarre visit. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. Show's on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Quick break, back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I want to say thanks to today's new member of the day, John Moyer, signed up at davidpakman.com/membership. Really appreciate it. And not only are our new members important, I also want to thank David Drost, who has been with us as a member since March of 2012. Thanks to John. Thanks to David, new and sustaining members. You can join them at davidpakman.com/membership. Coupon code is available. It'll save you 40%. It is Vote Soon 18. All right, it is time for Hatriot Mail. Very, very special Hatriot Mail today. You'll see why in a moment.
We're so alt-right, it's wrong. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
Yeah, so this week's Hatriot Mail combines a number of elements common to Hatriot Mail. Obviously, the requisite bad syntax and grammar is there, no questions about that. But we also have anti-Semitism, conspiracy theories, and sort of unhinged apoplectic defenses of Donald Trump. It's all there this week.
Pakman, you are the biggest moron on YouTube. That's right, little Pakman. That's what you do when you are in charge. You make real man decisions. Who said months ago the FBI was a piece of shit? Trump. He was right again. Fact. David Pakman is hiding Jew gold brought to Argentina by Hitler after he fled Germany at the end of WW2.
Yeah, combining both Hitler didn't actually die conspiracy theories with Jew gold conspiracy theories, which we've actually heard before on the program.
You should at least share the Jew gold.
I know, right? It's so selfish of me to hide all of Hitler's gold in Argentina, or whatever it is it says. If you want to send a middle finger to the Hatriots, you can use the membership coupon code HATRIOT40, HATRIOT. It'll save you 40%, and 3 Hatriots cry every time you use that coupon code on our website. At the end of March, I reported to you that Donald Trump decided to fire the head of the VA, the Veterans Affairs Department, and to appoint that doctor guy who said Trump really is 6'3" and weighs 239 pounds and could live to 200 years of age if he just ate a little bit better and did a bit of exercise. And it was abundantly obvious at the time that Dr. Ronny Jackson wasn't vetted. He had no real thought was given to the idea of making Ronny Jackson VA secretary, other than Trump loves people who brown nose him, and that's what Ronny Jackson did. So what the hell, have him run the VA despite having no real management experience of large organizations whatsoever, which is sort of the key thing that a VA secretary needs to do. And it took almost a full month, but it has now completely blown up in Trump's face, kind of for the wrong reasons, I would argue, although it's still a good thing in the end. And even though Ronny Jackson is saying he's not withdrawing his name from consideration, his nomination does appear to be pretty doomed at this point. He was going to testify today in front of a Senate committee, but it got delayed because of allegations that include that Jackson was drunk while working. He's accused of creating a hostile work environment, which sounds potentially like various kinds of either sexual harassment, physical abuse, verbal abuse. Who knows what that even means? He was improperly prescribing drugs to staff while he was White House doctor, and that's according to a Senator, John Tester. And the way we learned about these allegations is because people who worked with Jackson felt they had to come forward, and they made these disclosures. And Jackson is insisting he's not withdrawing his name from consideration, But Trump has basically torpedoed the nomination, saying that Jackson himself might want to make the decision to drop out. These are, quote, ugly allegations. He doesn't want Jackson to go through what's going to be an ugly process, and that if he were Dr. Ronny Jackson, he would bail. So more than likely, Jackson is going to end up not being the secretary of the VA, which is good. But I want to go back to the sort of original lack of qualification for the job. Ronny Jackson is completely unqualified to be secretary of the VA because he has no experience running organizations. He has almost no management experience to speak of. He has no business running this department. The fact that he might have prescribed some sleeping pills to staffers when he was traveling with, I think it was Barack Obama at the time that he was working for, drinking on the job. Yes, it's bad. I'm not defending any of these things. But he has no business even being nominated on the basis of his experience. And it's on Trump, right? White House doctor isn't a position that you need to be confirmed by the Senate for. And Trump has said again and again he's going to hire the best people. And yet the so-called best people keep on resigning, being forced to resign, getting fired, getting caught in horribly embarrassing situations. And nomination after nomination has failed because Trump keeps putting these unqualified people in front of the Senate. So I'm not saying I don't care about the White House doctor being drunk. I'm not saying I don't care about the White House doctor prescribing medications inappropriately for people. But this is a broader problem, which is that it's the exact type of swamp-filling cronyism that supposedly we weren't going to see under Donald Trump.
Yeah, but I think that if it was just about being unqualified, Jackson still would have skated through the Senate confirmation process. Because this is the VA secretary, certainly an important position, but you usually just let the president choose whomever he wants.
Yes.
At that, I think it's because of the scandals, it's because of the overprescription, showing up drunk. That's why this is a problem.
I don't doubt for a second that the real reason that this guy shouldn't be VA secretary was not going to keep him from being VA secretary, which is why I'm still glad that this happened. But this is the epitome of the Trump administration, or sort of microcosm in any case, right? It's a nomination that has cronyism, not hiring the best people, lack of professionalism, promotion of people who just placate the president, and the general feeling that Trump and the people he's appointing are all in way over their heads. And the lack of vetting is a small piece of it. It's the bigger picture that's concerning. And I want to remind you of something else. The VA had supposedly been mangled by Obama. Major disrespect to our veterans of the military. Trump ran on the military will be a top priority. Respect of veterans will be a top priority. Getting the VA turned around is going to be a top priority. Isn't it hugely disrespectful to the veterans that Trump claims Obama didn't respect and Democrats don't respect, that he would hire such an unqualified person? And that's the broader concern that I have here. And whatever the reason, it seems as though this is a nomination that is doomed, and we should all be glad for that, even if it's over what should actually be the least concerning elements of Ronny Jackson's past. Send me your thoughts about this. You can discuss it on our subreddit at davidpakman.com/Reddit. We'll take a quick break. The conclusion to my interview with Stephen Bonnell comes up next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We're continuing our conversation with Stephen Bonnell. He's known as Destiny in the gaming world. We have talked about his debates with the anti-SJW types. We've talked about pseudo and anti-intellectualism and a lot of other interesting topics. Let's get to sort of like what's going on with your various presences on the internet at this point. So you're banned from Twitter, I guess, again. Do you know why you're banned at this point?
No, I'm not sure. I mean, I can make some guesses, but I don't really know. Twitter never gave me the official tweet that I was banned for or anything.
Yeah, usually when you get banned, either temporarily or permanently, there is like some tweet or tweets associated with it. But you're saying you never got that?
No.
Huh. So why do you suspect you would be banned?
Are you familiar with all the people that argue about ethno states, like the alt-right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's like a whole basket of really funny things that you can bring up. And one of the things that I noticed in talking to a lot of these kind of alt-right types that talk about white ethnostates is that a lot of them, just by way of existing, kind of make all of the progressive arguments for being inclusive. Like a lot of these people that advocate, well, I'm not going to generalize, but like of the people that I argued with, a lot of the people that were arguing for these ethnostates were like half Hispanic, half black, half Indian. And I just thought it was funny that all of these people, when I would ask them, like, okay, well, how would you be included in the ethnostate? They would start to construct these insanely arbitrary definitions of what it means to be white. And it's funny because all of these people will tweet out and make fun of articles of like professors and academics, calling into question, what does it mean to be white? What does white even mean? And people always laugh at it, like, well, we all know what white means. But then when I talk to them, it's like, okay, so you consider yourself white? They make all the progressive arguments without even realizing it. And I think I probably was pretty rude. I think I made a tweet where it was something like, I think I tweeted like the last 3 ethno-state people that I debated, and I had them all in one picture, and I said something along the lines of like, this looks like the diverse cast of a Disney Channel original movie. So I don't know if like my Twitter got hit for like hate speech or something, because I know that Twitter's like really weird on how they come down on that. That's like my guess, is that it had something to do with that.
Is it possible that there was just like a campaign to mass flag and report you for stuff that would not like ordinarily get someone banned from Twitter?
Oh, that happens all the time. I deal with that on my YouTube, on my Twitter, on my Twitch. I deal with that across all platforms. I actually watch it happen. There are pull threads that'll go up on 4chan or threads across different forums where people will talk about how to mass report all my stuff. I get people that spam call me to the FBI and whatnot. I've had them visit my house twice over the past 6 months.
So I mean, about that, do you believe you're under investigation by the FBI for something related to child porn right now?
No. Although it's funny because I brought it up on my stream, and that's like the story that like 3 different people ran with. So basically what happens is, I don't want to speak like absolutely because I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but what it seems like happens is everybody on these forums, and I've turned over the images and everything to the FBI of these screenshots, is they will make these posts like, this is how you report this guy to the FBI, and they'll go through like the template that you need to use. It's kind of like, I guess, like swatting, except not as extreme. They go through the template like, oh, make sure you tell him that he looks at child porn all day, blah 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 blah. And the first time they came to my house was like probably like 5 or 6 months ago, and it was because people were calling them, telling them that I was threatening to like blow up a school or whatever. So usually what they do is they just stop by like, hey, we got a lot of reports on this, we just kind of want to ask you some questions, and then I usually explain like, okay, well, this is what I do, here are some images, these are the people that report me.
Okay, so
like,
wait, hold on.
okay.
We've just like raced past the most interesting elements of this, so let's back up a little bit.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
So you're sitting at home and the doorbell rings and it's the FBI?
Kind of, yeah. It's not like a full-on like a no-knock raid, like they're throwing in like flashbang grenades and trying to like barge in their house. It's 2 guys from the local office that just come down to kind of check up because they're getting a lot of like anonymous online reports or whatever.
Okay, and are they wearing suits?
No, they're not. They're non-clothed or whatever. I mean, they have their badges, but
so they say, we're with the local FBI office. Can we come in, or do they explain to you at the door why their presence is needed there?
I think they explain at the door, and then because I'm a naive white person, I invite them in to talk or whatever, so maybe I shouldn't do that.
Okay,
but,
so they come in. How long does the FBI spend at your place?
Probably like 30 minutes. It's usually just a few questions, and then I usually show them some screenshots of stuff that I deal with so they kind of have an idea. Because I figure like if they don't know anything about me, it's probably really weird to be getting a lot of these types of tips. Like they might think it's somewhat credible or something, so I usually have to explain what I do, who I am, and then talk about the people that I deal with.
And so you say, I'm known online as Destiny, and like, here's what I do. You show them your streaming setup and sort of like talk them through what it is that's happening.
In more adult-friendly ways, yeah. I'll usually like, I do online video broadcasting, and I deal in a lot of political topics, and there are a lot of people that don't like me, and they post stuff on the internet to try to defame or slander me. Here are some screenshots of templates that people will use to contact you at the FBI. You've probably seen people send stuff in like this. I'm sorry for the trouble, etc., like that. And
do they generally seem, I mean, of course, they might just be playing it as if they're not that concerned to keep you calm, but do they seem to sort of get what's going on?
Yeah, after I explain things, they seem to understand pretty well, yeah. Especially after I start showing them some screenshots, yeah.
And how is it left? Is it left as sort of like, we'll follow up if we need anything else, or do you end up feeling like maybe I should be calling a lawyer right now?
I did after the last one just because I was so paranoid, but they usually the last 2 times they just said like, okay, well, yeah, we'd feel good talking to you. If we have any more questions, we'll call you back. And then they usually never do.
Wow. And is this the only time that this has happened?
It got real bad over the past 6 to 12, man, probably 6 months, I would say, is when it's ramped up. This is where I don't remember, or I'm not sure if you're aware of this or not, but I had to take a step back from doing all of this online political stuff because the collateral damage is starting to extend to like my family, and that's really it's not acceptable to me. I can't.
Yeah,
deal
I mean,
with
I
that.
wanted to talk about that, and you don't have to. I mean, we don't want to make the problem worse by talking about the specifics, but I'd be interested in hearing a little bit about sort of like the dynamics of what you even mean by that.
Yeah, so I guess I've played both sides of the. Well, I don't want to say that like I'm disingenuous, but I used to be very right-leaning, and back in my early days, I was, ironically enough, very viciously hunted by SJWs. And usually, what they would do is they would try to contact sponsors to get you delisted off of stuff or to make you lose your income. That was always the left way of attacking me, or at least was their goal. For the right, it seems like it's to do whatever damage possible and to like cause whatever harm possible to the person. So for instance, like I could actually link you to live posts of people saying things like, if we could SWAT him while his kid is there, maybe the cops will shoot his kid. I bet he'll get real mad about that. You know, like those guys go insane. You know, they try to find information about my family members and whatnot. Yeah, the people on the right seem to go really, really hard in trying to find whatever they can to destroy, I guess, the life of whatever person they're currently after.
What do you think about that tactic that you sort of ascribed to the left of trying to get advertisers to bail on advertising on programs? Because I actually have been supportive of that. For example, recently with the Laura Ingraham program, there was the entire thing relating to Mozilla some years ago. And people will say to me, but David, people could do the exact same thing to you. And my response would be, well, if I say something that by its association with me is bad for advertisers, how can I argue that they should stay with me even if they don't want to advertise with me? Like, in other words, it's nonviolent. It, of course, could impact one's livelihood, but you can't be exempt from the repercussions of your speech. So I actually am supportive of that tactic generally.
So this is where this is going to be one of my center positions.
Yeah.
I'll probably fall really hard right here. I'm a really big free speech advocate, and I mean, I don't know how deep you want to get into this. We could go like really hard into this conversation, but basically, to distill this into like a simple thing, my biggest fear is that I don't know if you start to do that type of censorship, I don't know where that stops, and that
well,
really
but how is
worries
it censorship? I guess is the question, right? Because
it's censorship because you're taking a person's message and you're trying to get it removed from any kind of platform. It's not government censorship, but it is a form of censorship.
I don't know, because I'm free to say I'm not entitled to ad revenue. I have no right to ad revenue. Ad revenue is sort of an ongoing negotiation between advertisers evaluating my content and gauging the response from my audience and whether that's a good fit. I'm completely free to say whatever I want on my program. Advertisers are free to use any means that they want to evaluate what's a good advertising platform for them and what isn't. And my audience is sort of free to contact whoever they want with a suggestion about whether they think they should or shouldn't advertise with me. Like, I just don't see it as censorship.
Sure. So I'm going to take a very hyper nuanced approach to this, and I'll give you an example from the left and an example from the right.
Okay.
To try to see if I can get you on this. So, or well, not get you, but just kind of explain my rationale. So when I talk about censorship, first I'll be clear in defining this. Basically, censorship is a way to get somebody's message removed from where it can be publicly viewable. It's like your goal when you censor somebody. So let's say that you have somebody who makes a full-time living talking about how they want to create an ethno-state. And so they get on YouTube and they start making this. Let's say they get reasonably popular. Well, now they're able to take time off work and they can put full time into doing that on YouTube.
Sure.
If you're a content creator, being able to do it as your job means that the quality of your content increases 100-fold. It's paramount. You have to be able to do it as your full-time job. If you find a way to deprive that person of income, you're in a way kind of censoring their message, because if you deprive them of income, they're not able to make money doing it. They've got to spend less time doing it, more time doing other things. You've kind of like dampened their message or hurt their ability to get their message out. Sorry, burped. By doing that, which I kind of think is a form of censorship. Is censorship. To give kind of a left-leaning example, because that would be the right-leaning example. We got a guy doing this, right? For a left-leaning example, let's say that you have somebody that is a trans person that does a lot of trans-related issues on YouTube channels. Maybe you don't want this person to do this kind of stuff anymore. Maybe you find ways to harass this person. You send them mean messages. You make mean posts about them online. Technically, you're just exercising your freedom of speech. You're not really preventing them from doing anything. Advertisers can still work with them and everything. But say that this person is getting bullied so much that they feel like they're not really comfortable sharing their opinions publicly anymore. You haven't really censored them, but effectively you kind of have.
I think the two situations are not analogous, number one. But the most important thing is, isn't it the sort of full scope of the concept of the free market of ideas that if an ethno-state show appeals to advertisers, doesn't create a PR problem, and brings them valuable customers, that they're going to, again, in the free market of ideas, earn ad dollars, but that if those ideas are simply not good for business, they're not good for advertisers, the free market will determine that they don't. Like, it seems like the opposite of censorship, which is the ideas are all out there, and any advertiser can either choose to sort of ride the train or not.
Yeah, I guess, so here's a question that's kind of tangentially related. Do you think that like boycotting Chick-fil-A is a good idea, that most people should be boycotting Chick-fil-A?
Each person should make a decision about their patronage of Chick-fil-A based on however they determine who they want to do business with. If they think that the views of Chick-fil-A on LGBT rights are deplorable, but the quality of the chicken overrides that, then they might say, I'm still going to go, or not, right? But I mean, it's not for me to say what most people should do. I don't go to Chick-fil-A, mostly because I don't go to fast food restaurants, but also because of the politics.
I guess I'm just uncomfortable with that, because as a company themselves, they're not anti-LGBT as far as I'm aware. But I think the owner makes donations to like Christian and anti-LGBT. I don't know exactly. It's something like that, right?
Yeah.
The CEO or whatever. Yeah. I guess the thing that scares me is I'm very much a believer in the free marketplace of ideas, and I think that kind of dies if the entire culture is selling a single narrative, and anything that stands counter to that narrative runs the risk of being instantly deplatformed and losing all of their revenue, and that there's like no voice for those types of people.
But what you're basically saying is that there are consequences to speech that you are okay with, and then consequences that you're not okay with. But that, as long as we're not talking about violence or criminality, speech has consequences, and who are you or I or anybody to say where the line is drawn on what the consequences can be?
Well, but we are the ones making those decisions, right? When people contact advertisers, so here's an example. The internet has changed everything in terms of like how responsibility is felt for things that you do. Yep. Do you remember those two guys that made the dongle joke at oh God, it was like a Python or something. It was like a coding conference a long time ago. Two guys made like a joke about the guy talked about like a large dongle. He was talking about USB dongle, and they made like a kind of a dumb dick joke or whatever. Yeah. And there was a lady sitting behind them that tweeted their picture.
I don't remember it, but I can understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, but this blew up into like a massive thing where everybody was like, everybody on the internet had an opinion on this, and like the two guys involved lost their job. Both the company that hired them caught a lot of flack. The woman that tweeted the picture, she lost her job. The company that hired her got a lot of flack. There was just so much going on because it seems like people are like hyper intolerant of other points of views. Where like if somebody like espouses a certain point of view, like this person has to be absolutely destroyed from the internet. No advertising revenue. No nothing. I use ethno-states as my example. That's probably over the line, and that's pretty extreme. But people would advocate for the same type of deplatforming as, say, somebody that is for small government and wants to get rid of welfare, right? Which personally I think is a horrible idea. But I mean, like, I would be uncomfortable with people pushing to deplatform and remove advertisers from a person that pushes this.
Right,
just
but
because
the free market would most likely dictate that just being against government welfare programs is not controversial or offensive enough for advertisers to actually pull out.
Yeah, I guess, but like, oh man, I don't know. The free marketplace of ideas I think we kind of touched on this last time, Doug. The free marketplace of ideas, if we go by what we see in Hollywood, if we go by what we see via advertisements, if we go by what we see in workplace culture from like training and whatnot, shows that 99.999% of America is full of people with progressive values. But the last election showed that divide went way deeper than we thought it did. So it seems like there's a breakdown there in terms of like when you see like advertisers are so quick to pull out of anything that is even remotely maybe possibly could upset like one person. When you see advertisers pull out of all of these programs, I don't know. I guess like I'm sure you've heard of everything going on with YouTube recently, with like the massive like demonetization of like any video that touches even the I'm gonna butcher his name, the Kurzagat guy that does like educational videos.
I don't know him.
But like things like this. Like I think his last video was like how to make like the most dangerous bomb in the universe would be like a black hole bomb. He does like educational videos on science. Like videos like that are getting demonetized and stuff. It just seems like we've moved so far in the direction where if people see something that they don't like, it has to be destroyed. Rather than like, if I look at something and somebody's saying something and I don't like it, my instinct is to turn it off. It seems like the instinct today is like, I need to find out how that thing makes money and I need to obliterate it. I need to absolutely destroy it. And I'm just uncomfortable with that kind of thinking.
Well, I think we'll have to talk more about it, and I am going to think more about it. But it is something that people say, David, if you live by that, you might die by it, and I'm open to that, and I'm open to that because I think that my speech could have consequences, and I could lose advertisers, and I wouldn't really. It wouldn't be. How can I force an advertiser to ignore that activism, and thus how can I tell someone to say you shouldn't contact my advertisers? I just have a real. I guess. The problem I have is if you're going to say that that's not okay, the sequence that follows from it is what's concerning to me. But maybe a topic to flesh out in the future.
Yeah, you can go real deep on both sides. And I mean, I understand your point of view for sure. It's a really fleshed out topic. Like you can get really deep on both sides on that.
Stephen Bonnell, known as Destiny in the gaming world. We will link to his various platforms in the description to the YouTube video. Thanks for talking to me again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've had the conversation before about how there are sort of two justice systems in our country, and there's lots of models of this, right? There's the idea that there's a justice system for the rich and a justice system for the poor. There's the idea that there's a justice system for white people and another for non-white people, prosecuted, convicted, sentenced more harshly for many of the same crimes, particularly a lot of the crimes that sort of fall under the umbrella of the war on drugs. There's a justice system for corporations and another for the little guy, right? The Supreme Court, for example, finding much more often in favor of corporate interests than in favor of the individual. And that gets us to this week. You might remember this case from March where Crystal Mason, a black woman in Texas, was sentenced to 5 years in prison for accidentally voting illegally in the 2016 election. She was on probation for a fraud conviction, meaning she was not allowed to vote. She voted, and she was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison. There's another story from last year about Rosa Maria Ortega, who was convicted of voting illegally in the 2012 general election and the 2014 Republican runoff in Texas. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison. And in comparison, remember, two justice systems, Tarrant County Justice of the Peace Russ Casey has pleaded guilty to effectively rigging his own election. He signed off on signatures that he knew were fake in order to get on the March 6th primary ballot. He received 5 years probation, not prison, not jail. So there's actually multiple angles here, right? There's the sort of obvious race angle, which is Crystal Mason is black, Rosa Maria Ortega is Hispanic, and Justice of the Peace Russ Casey is white. I actually don't think that's the most relevant sort of judicial system disparity here. The more relevant one is that Crystal Mason and Rosa Maria Ortega are random people, whereas Russ Case is a justice of the peace, right? He's part of the system. And I read an argument online saying, well, hold on a second. Crystal Mason was already on probation when she voted illegally. That means her sentence should be harsher. We're talking about a justice of the peace who rigged their own election. That's a proactive action. Isn't that an aggravating factor compared to accidentally voting illegally? There's another argument I read, which is, well, Mason was a tax preparer years ago, and she inflated some returns for clients. That's a white-collar crime, and I'm not defending white-collar crime. In fact, I've argued that white-collar crime is not prosecuted harshly enough, but you've got to be consistent. And Crystal Mason getting 5 years in prison when a justice of the peace gets probation also doesn't make sense. And then we get to the broader problem. Prosecutor Matt Smid was asked about the sentencing disparities, and he said, well, the two women, Rosa Maria Ortega and Crystal Mason, they didn't accept plea agreements and they went to trial. Casey accepted a plea agreement. That is really, really disturbing to me, because what the prosecutor is basically saying is that the women ended up with harsher sentences because they invoked their constitutionally protected right to a trial, right? And if the job of the prosecutor is justice, punishing people for invoking their right to trial is problematic at its base. And we know that that's how it works, right? We've talked about the entire plea agreement industrial complex. It's a mechanism used to put nonviolent drug offenders in prison in huge numbers, and that's something we should all be concerned about. And then lastly, there's the other debate. We've talked about this before, probably a bigger conversation than we can have now, which is, should you be able to vote when you're on probation, and should you be able to vote when you're in prison? It's a broader debate. I remember you took a strong position on that, Pat, although I don't remember what it was.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to think about it a little bit. I feel like maybe when you're in prison, I could see them taking away your right to vote.
You're okay with that?
But certainly when you're on probation or parole, you should be able to. That's my take anyway.
The counter argument would be probation and parole are privileges. You could be in prison the entire time so that your actions are evaluated as if you were still in prison. Like, that's the argument they would make.
Once you're on probation or parole, you start to get some of your rights back,
yes,
though. So I think voting can be one of them.
In any case, there's like 3 or 4 different layers to this story. And the bottom line is 5 years probation for a guy who rigged his own election.
Yeah, and these are really harsh sentences too, like 5 years in prison or 8 years in prison.
Yeah.
And it's no wonder why voter fraud isn't really that prevalent, because those are really harsh sentences, and it's in exchange for one seemingly inconsequential vote. Like, you're not going to change an election with that.
And
so when Trump argues that 3 million people voted illegally, it's not very true.
What we've seen is that, number one, very few people actually do so-called in-person voter fraud or illegal voting, and that when they do, they're often trying to test the system to prove how easy it is to vote illegally, and they end up getting caught and being sentenced to prison. Like, it's the actual exact opposite narrative as to what you would need to believe that 3 to 5 million people voted illegally for Hillary Clinton. We will follow whether there are appeals here for sure. We've got a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. You can call any time of day. Many people do call at very unusual times of day, at least for people who are in American time zones, I guess we would say. Let's take a listen to the voicemail that came in today.
Hi, David. Just wondering if you've ever touched on the subject of the growing population of the Earth, and what your thoughts are on that, and if you think it's going to be an environmental catastrophe. Seems like a very taboo subject to discuss. Anyway, thanks. Love the show.
I don't know that it's taboo. I mean, we've interviewed experts about the concept of overpopulation. There's sort of 2 answers to that, right? From a strictly mathematical perspective, the carrying capacity of the Earth is not even close to, like not even remotely close to being approached even slightly on the basis of potential resources, on the basis of energy demand, etc. If, and this is a big if, we start to actually take more seriously reducing our carbon footprint and energy consumption. The concern is that if the major sort of carbon consumers and polluting countries don't make big changes in terms of reducing carbon footprint, if we don't start moving away from fossil fuels to power home heating and automobiles and airplanes and so many other modern sort of industrialized technologies, then yes, you could actually argue in that case that we've already reached a population which, based on current average carbon use and energy consumption, is taxing the planet. So we've got a lot of headroom if we start making the changes that climatologists and climate scientists and others have been saying we need to make for decades at this point. If we don't start doing that, then we are actually going to have a so-called overpopulation problem, which won't really be an overpopulation problem. It'll be an over-energy consumption problem in reality.
Yeah, I know that if you stand everyone in the world shoulder to shoulder,
Rhode Island,
you can fit them all within Rhode Island, but I guess we need more resources than just being able to stand up straight.
Yes.
So it is a little bit more than that. And also, I guess this topic can be taboo, even if you're not talking about like killing people for population control, because I think it's generally thought of that you want to like limit the amount of children that people can have, China's one-child policy.
Yeah.
And yeah, that can be taboo for sure.
Well, we once got a call during live calls from an anti-natalist asking if I am subscribed to anti-natalist philosophy and believe that we should simply stop procreating because of all the problems that we're causing. And at the time, I thought it was relatively uncontroversial for me to say no. I think there's lots of other things we can just fix rather than saying we're going to exterminate or basically allow the human race to go extinct. And I actually took some heat from that. A lot of people saying, David, how dare you suggest humans keep reproducing?
Wow, you're like a pro-natalist.
Yeah, I'm in favor of humans continuing to have children. It's crazy. On the bonus show today, we will talk about Finland having second thoughts about their basic income experiment. We'll talk about a monkey losing a selfie copyright case, and there's actually a lot of interesting broader copyright questions there. And we will also talk about how a, quote, real Indian is now running against Senator Elizabeth Warren, supposedly a fake Indian. If you've not familiarized yourself with the story of Elizabeth Warren's Native American background, we will familiarize you with it on today's bonus show. DavidPakman.com/membership, Patreon.com/DavidPakman Show, both ways to access the bonus show, which is coming up next.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.